So my journey with the out-of-body experience started when I was about 12 years old. I had my first out-of-body experiences in a spontaneous way. There was I had 2 or 3 of them just laying down. I was about 12, and then I would find myself floating vertically above my body or nearby or in another location completely. But I wasn't in the classic over my body looking down at myself like most people describe in out-of-body experiences. I was in a vertical upright position, almost like I was almost like this, in fact, just a few feet above the ground, just floating in the air. And they would only last a few seconds, and then they would end. But it got my interest in the subject started, and a few years later, or a year and a half later or so, I bought my first book on the subject, and I decided that I really wanted to learn to induce them intentionally. So I spent the next 6 months, and I was doing this every night, going through these really basic techniques, but it was all I had at the time, so I just went through them day after day, and nothing was really happening, and I was getting really frustrated with the process, and I'd been doing this for so long. And then it got to 6 months down the line, and I was at the point of giving up. I was like, this really isn't working, I should just forget about it, and it's not going to happen. And pretty much at that point, I laid down, and it was the first time in a way that I wasn't stressed or trying to push the experience to happen. I was just letting the experience happen in a much more natural way. So I just laid there and said, well, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And that point was kind of a breakthrough for me. I felt like this surge of energy, like I'd been hit by lightning, just went straight through my body. I was lifted maybe 6 feet above my body, this time in the classic position looking down at myself. I couldn't move very well in many directions. I could just move as if there was a pole rotating through me, like I could do that, but I couldn't lift upright or move anywhere else. I was kind of constricted, and off of my body there was a blue energy that seemed to be going to all the walls and lighting up the whole room. So this lasted maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and then I came back to my body. And that was my first induced out-of-body experience. And from then on, it was almost like I'd opened the floodgates, and I started to have them in a regular way, and it was day after day I was having out-of-body experiences, and all I had to do was be aware of the conditions, and if the conditions were right, I would be able to do it, which usually for me meant that I would feel this wave, this sort of undulating wave. It wasn't like a vibration like people often describe. It was more of a steady, consistent wave coming through my body. And that, when I had that sensation, then I could focus my attention and I would have an out-of-body experience. So those were the elements that seemed to be key with me. But it was around that point that I was very first exploring the whole process that I realised that my experiences were different to what other people were experiencing. Some people would describe this vibrational state, this really sharp, high energy vibration through their body, and others wouldn't. And I soon started working with a teacher who was teaching these things in London at the time, and he began to say to me, oh, but if you're under 18 you can't see in colour, for example, was one of the things he said to me, which was totally not true, and I could see in colour. So I started to question a lot of the esoteric ideas and a lot of the belief systems that people were putting forward. So I started to think, well, if I want to try and teach other people to do these things, which I really wanted to do from very early on, because obviously lots of people were saying to me, how do you do this, how can you do this? Because of that, right from the beginning I was exploring methods, techniques, ways to improve the experience, ways to develop it in other people. And I found that I needed to get rid, in a way, of the esoteric ideas that I filled my mind with by reading books on the subject, and I needed to go more back to the root of the experience. And I think in many ways that's where my book, the early seeds of my book were sown, because it was from that point of perspective that I wanted to do it in a more scientific, more open-minded way and just say, well, what is this experience? If I go right back to the beginning and I say, what is actually happening? Forget about the beliefs, forget about all the preconceptions that you might have going into it. What is actually happening in the experience, and what is the most effective way of inducing this? So that led me to look into science, parapsychology, and different areas like that, and to think about, well, what are those subjects telling us about the experience? What hints do they give us about how this experience might be induced? So it became a whole journey for me, and I started to work with immersive technologies. I started to use hypnosis and different sound frequencies. I worked with virtual reality. I started to build structures. There's an image of one of the structures in the magazine, actually. I built this structure that lifted the person off of the ground, so there was this sense that they were floating. And then I used a hypnotic induction to help induce the out-of-body experience. So it was a process of using all of the senses. Most of the techniques I'd come across were purely visualization techniques. They were about using an image in your mind and using that to help you have the out-of-body experience. But I thought, well, if you think about hypnosis or you think about other areas, this idea of using all of your senses or all of your emotions and everything that makes you who you are and bringing that all together to help you have the out-of-body experience, that would be more effective. Another thing that I discovered was that individuals are different.
Raise your voice a little more. Yeah, sorry.
Everyone is different. So I needed to find a way to make my techniques specific to the person that I was working with. Some people, for example, are very visual people, but other people are much more physical. They're much more into exercise and running around and being very energetic. So for those kinds of people, using physical techniques. So I developed techniques that helped to put you into a physical state that was conducive to the out-of-body experience. So in my book, there's a G technique that I developed that creates this state, the perfect state to be in an out-of-body experience, which in my work I've identified that being in a almost exhausted state, but a heightened mental state. It doesn't necessarily have to be deep relaxation, it can be exhaustion as well, as long as the mental focus is also there. So I developed this technique to help put the person into that kind of physical state. So you're not just working with the visual element or the psychological element, but you're working with the physical as well. And then I looked at diet. There's a whole section in the book about diet. There's the talk about the immersive approaches, and then I bring that all together with the science. So to try and say, well, what other factors affect things? For example, I found there's a correlation with the moon. In my experiences, often I would have a very, very powerful out-of-body experience in the five-day run-up to the full moon. Other people it seems to be different, but for me that's a key time. I went back through my diaries. I've been keeping detailed diaries since I was 14. So when I was writing my first book, which is more about my own experiences, I could go right back and look at all of my entries and say, well, this was a key experience. What was the lunar effect when I had that experience? Or what state of mind was I in? Or even sunspots. There's researchers like Michael Persinger who have done work where they think that psychic abilities are linked to the geomagnetic field of the Earth. So when the geomagnetic field of the Earth is quiet, it's almost like the signal is higher. If you think about a radio signal, there's no interference. So when the geomagnetic field is calm, your psychic abilities function better. So this is something that Michael Persinger and others...
Be exhausted but mentally alert.
I call it the G technique. It's I mean, it's in the books, but it's basically uses muscle tension and breathing techniques to both vitalize the mind, but also reach a state of exhaustion with the body. So that combination seems to be the most effective for me. My most powerful out-of-body experiences have been through working with that, and one where I even had a precognitive experience where I saw the Soho bombing that happened in '99. I was standing on the corner of Moore Street and Old Compton Street, and I watched the explosion come out. And then when I returned to my body, I was told the people around me what I'd just seen. I was actually in like a workshop when it happened, and then 5 days later the explosion happened, how I saw it. So that really challenged my whole sense of time and space as well, because up until that point I didn't really imagine that you could see a future event in any kind of sense. And yeah, I still find it hard to get my head around how those things are possible, but there are a lot more theories and ideas now out there about how that could be possible. And in the book I talked to people like Tom Campbell and Dean Radin, and I've worked with Rupert Sheldrake as well. He's a scientist who looks at telepathy and things like that. So a lot of conversations with them fed into the science part of the book and the whole exploring time and space and different theories of what might be going on. Because I didn't want to assume that there's a body coming out of you and going off somewhere. I was thinking, well, maybe it's consciousness interconnected with everything around you, because that's more how I experience it on a day-to-day level maybe. Whereas some of the more traditional models say that it's this body coming out. So I explore both, and I explore things like morphic fields from Rupert Sheldrake's ideas, and whether that could apply to the body around, like almost like an aura around your body or something like that. So yeah, that's kind of bringing all of the elements together.
Right. Many people have fearful barriers, or barriers that because of fear, or because of the unknown, that prevent them from having successful consciousness exploration experiences, like an out-body experience. What tips would you give to someone in trying to overcome fears?
Well, actually, there's a whole section on fear in the book as well, fear and apathy.
Yeah.
Because actually, probably the key reason that people fail in inducing an out-of-body experience is actually giving up too soon, I find. So I talk about motivation and apathy and things like that as well. But fear, there's a range of techniques in there, but one of the key ones would probably be this becoming more familiar with the experience. So actually visualizing yourself going through it, not as a technique to leave the body, but just to become comfortable with the idea of being out of your body. Also using audio-visual footage, for example, like footage of aerial footage of landscapes, so you get this sense of floating or this sense of moving over landscapes. You can use that as a way of doing a meditation that actually encourages the idea that you might have an out-of-body experience, because I think it's this process of creating a whole immersive sense around you. So everything you do, the more you can immerse yourself in the fact that you're trying to have an out-of-body experience, the more likely you are to have one. So it's not just about having a set of techniques and I sit down and I do them for an hour a day or half an hour a day. It's this thing of making a whole shift in your life, maybe looking at your diet, looking at how you exercise, looking at all the different elements. And when you start to do that, I think the more you see it as a process in your life, I think the fear elements start to dissipate. You become more comfortable with what you're doing because you're more engaged with it, and it doesn't seem like something alien. I mean, all fears are usually of the unknown or something that we're uncomfortable with, so the more you become comfortable and aware of them, the less it's a problem, the more. That's kind of how I...
And you mentioned overcoming apathy, so what would be a good motivational tip?
Well, I talk about structuring your time and looking at your time and thinking about what's going on in your life at particular points. So you restructure your time, but also looking at what inspires you. Do you get inspired when you watch a TV program on this kind of subject? Do you get inspired when you hear a lecture? Do you get inspired when you meet with friends who have similar interests? So if those are the things that motivate you and inspire you to be active and positive, then bringing those things into your life, actually doing more of those things, so that the knock-on effect is you become more inspired and more engaged with what you're doing. And also, I think setting very realistic targets for what you're going to do. I think often when people start a new program of learning, they'll, like if you sign up to the gym, a lot of people go to the gym and they'll do 5 hours the very first day that they go, and then they feel terrible the next day because they're so exhausted, and then they don't go to the gym anymore, and then it's over. Whereas, so I tend to say, think about what you could realistically do, and then maybe do a little bit less than that, and then the consistency is much easier. I mean, I actually use that approach in my writing. I have a very easy target, but if you can maintain the consistency, then very quickly it amounts to a lot. So it's that's kind of one of the approaches it talks about.
Thank you very much for sharing that. That's good tip.
Any other questions?
Just one question. So are you at a point now where you can literally any night you want go into an outward experience, or do you still have to? Do you still sometimes fail, or?
I think it's more when the conditions are right. There are times when I could force it to happen, but if I force it to happen, the quality of the experience is usually very low. So in a way, there's no point doing that. So I tend to think it's better to become more aware of the right conditions and the right kind of feeling that's consistent with your own experiences, and then focus your attention there rather than trying to do it at any particular point in time. Because I think with a lot of spiritual type experiences, they tend to happen at peaks. Again, when you're very inspired or something big is happening in your life, you have these peak moments when something powerful happens or something transformative happens. And I think the out-body experiences are somewhat like that too, for me.
Would you say it's possible there are some people that only have this once, like near-death experiences, and other people that can do it? I mean, everybody should be able to do it, but I mean, it's like going up a mountain pass on a bicycle or something, you know, you've got to train yourself. But, I mean, are we predisposed? Is it just like everybody must be able to do it, like doing a press-up, or may there be reasons why some people